Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Maggie.
How's it going?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. It's an early morning for me, you know. This is your happy hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is my I'm still waking
happy
up hour.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not drinking right now.
Yeah,
I'm just at my peak.
But you're awake enough to be drinking and I'm not.
Yes, that's true. All right, so today's episode is one that you came up with, but I think we both share a passion for, and I'm really excited to jump into it.
Yeah, so we're going to share our 30 plus years of career advice from being in corporate America. And I think it's worth saying this advice applies to, I believe, to anyone in any job, whether you're self-employed, whether you're a teacher, whether you work in corporate America, whether you work in, Wall Street. I think I don't know. Some people in Wall Street might have some different views on some pieces of this advice, but the point is that I think this advice is transferable to many different industries and types of jobs.
Yeah, because it's really about understanding and managing yourself and your relationships with other people, which applies to any sort of environment. I would even say it's not just all job types, but all relationship types. I think you can take from this a lot of different learnings.
Yeah, very true. And just for those who want to hear a little bit about our credentials here, I've got 20 years working in corporate America, 80% of the time in leadership roles, leading small to very large teams. I've done a massive amount of hiring. I've done a reasonable amount of firing and having to manage people out because they're not able to deal with these concepts we're about to talk about. And so I've got a lot of experience in what works and what doesn't. I've seen it all. I've seen what I've done myself, but I've also seen what other people have done. And then Mike, I don't know if you want to talk about your experience.
I have been working a little bit less than you. I'm younger and also went to business school full time. So I've only been working for like 12 years.
And you did some other things before you went to business school.
I was a TV writer and producer for a few years before business school. So I have less experience in corporate America, but I have worked for more large corporations than you have. I've worked for 3 very large companies. And we share a lot of similar thoughts on this and experience, but we also have enough diversity in the types of jobs and the types of companies we worked at where we think this is going to be applicable to a lot of people who are working in white collar jobs.
Yeah, pretty seasoned advice. I would argue some of this stuff is applicable to people in blue collar jobs also, but I don't have experience in that area post high school, so I can't speak to that. Actually, I have a lot of experience during high school and college. So I would argue, not that we're adding up years of experience, I have like 8 years of experience in blue collar jobs. Between high school and college. So
did this just become a competition, Maggie?
No, I was more saying blue. You said applicable to white collar. And I was like, I would argue this is applicable to blue collar jobs too. Okay. So we'll jump in. And the one thing that I think is important to kind of preface too here is the advice we're going to talk about today is, well, 2 interesting things about it. One, it's advice that we would consider kind of part 1, like the basics. We actually want to do a second episode that's more focused on once you master these basics, which is managing yourself, how you can get promoted and how you can ask for a raise. I think those are 2 skill sets that people often kind of struggle with. And so we'll do that as a part 2. But if you can't get this stuff right first, there is no part 2. Like you can't get promoted and you can't get more money if you can't do the things we're talking about today. Well, I believe based on my experience.
And I would agree with that experience too.
Yeah. And Mike's the one who's always like approving promotions financially. And so, he sees, what comes through.
Yep. And I'm providing feedback on those people too, whether you know it or not.
Yeah. Same thing, which is a point we'll talk about. Everybody you interact with is providing feedback on you, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I'd say that I think is interesting is I've given this advice at different talks over the years because this is my, personal view on what makes people successful and what I personally have focused on. But when you take a step back and look at it, this is the same stuff I share with my kids, the same type of advice, right? And they're still figuring out their place in the world and how to be. And so what's interesting is, these concepts are pretty basic, but there's often a lot of like grown adults in professional settings that need to be reminded of these things. And so I'm not saying that to compare anyone to a kid. I just do think it's interesting when you take a step back and look at this advice. It's often the same things I'm trying to teach my growing children that are figuring out their place in the world. Okay. So before we jump into the list, Mike, one thing that there's this quote that I once read and I love it. It's perhaps the quote is, perhaps figuring out what matters most matters most.
I like that.
And you sometimes to me, that's one of those quotes where you sometimes need to like reread it and wait a minute. So I'll say it again. Perhaps figuring out what matters most matters most. The idea or the concept there is you've got to figure out what matters to you, which we'll talk about a few throughout this, right? This is what matters to me and to Mike. And you've got to figure out yourself and what you're going to put, your priorities and your time on. And everyone's different, right? Just like we talk about personal finances, how you manage your career is a personal decision, right? You need to be yourself and you need to figure out what matters to you. And if these things don't matter to you, that's a choice you can make. Now, I happen to think all the things we're about to talk through should matter to everyone for various reasons. Again, because they're fairly basic concepts. But I just think it's important to kind of take a step back and think about like, well, what does matter to you? So if this list might inspire you to make your own list of what you want to focus on, that might be a little bit different, but it's worth spending the time to figure out what matters to you and what you want your personal brand to be and who you want to be in your professional life. So take us away, Mike. Let's start the list.
Where did that quote come from? You did not attribute it to anybody.
I don't know.
The internet?
I have used it. Let me.
Oh, you've used it so much it's now your quote? Is that how it works?
No, I've used it and I've had it as like an image for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to Google it, but I don't know where it wasn't like an image that had like a name under it. It was an image that had like a really cool kind of font and visual display.
Yeah.
But what's funny is I just Googled it and it's not coming up as like attributable to anybody's name.
Wouldn't it be funny though if it was attributable to somebody horrible like Mussolini said it,
I know, right?
And you've been including it in all your PowerPoints.
I know, right? Hopefully it's not, fact check, do your research. That's not one of the pieces of our career advice.
Right.
FYI.
That does not matter.
Yeah. You know what? It doesn't seem attributable to anyone, which means I'll take credit for it.
All right.
So turns out Maggie said that.
Great. All right. Let's jump into the list, Maggie. Number 1, worry about yourself. The only person that you can control is yourself. Don't compare yourself to others. Don't do it in your head. Don't do it to your superiors or your colleagues. Now, what I will say is that you can learn from people. Like, you will see how other people are performing and interacting, and you will see what is good and what is bad. And you can learn from those things. But it is not a worthwhile activity to constantly compare yourself and to attribute value to yourself based on what you're seeing in others.
Yeah. And this is one of those, Mike, that can be a derailer, right? So everything you just said on a personal level for your own mental health, you're going to be happier if you just focus on yourself. But from a professional setting, the people who I have led and managed over the years, and not even just myself, but that have worked for other people, because I'm involved in a lot of like succession planning and broader HR discussions about big teams that aren't just reporting into me. And the people who come in and talk to their bosses and are pointing to what's happening with other people and how come I'm not getting promoted? This person got promoted, that person got promoted, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't bode well ever, right? Like pointing to someone else. And this is one of the ones where I make comparisons to kids, right? Like when my kids roll in and are like, well, my sister got this. And so how come I don't? I'm like, that's not a reason for something, right? Like that is not a rationale for something. And that turns it on to about someone else and not about you. And the people who worry so much about what's going on with other people and aren't like managing their own house, it's a huge career derailer, whether they realize it or not.
Mhm.
So I think this is an important one on multiple levels and layers. Okay. Number 2 is just be nice, be kind. There's a Buddhist phrase called bodhicitta. I probably just mispronounced it. That is the enlightened mind. It's the mind that strives towards awakening empathy and compassion for the benefit of all sentient beings. And I love that. I love that the Buddhist approach to it. But it's just figuring out whatever is going to motivate and drive you to be a kind person. Assume the best in other people. Play nicely with others. Like find your empathy and compassion towards other people. Like I know I just said assume the best, but like assume the best, not the worst. Like go into situations with kindness and a positive outlook and attitude. And it will take you so much further in life, even in like more cutthroat corporate America sort of situations.
And I will give a small caveat to this based on my own experience. Assume the best in people, but when they show you the worst and prove to you the worst, don't put up with people's shit and stand up for yourself when you know it's right. Because if you are constantly nice to people, they will walk all over you and it will eventually hurt your career and your mental health in your professional life and your personal life.
Yeah, Mike, I will give a caveat to your caveat, which is I agree with you in some situations. So what I would say to people is choose your battles, right? Like things can get pretty political at times. And the word political has negative connotations in many ways, but I don't think of politics and the word political as always a negative word. It's a descriptive word to describe the environment often happening within companies, which is there's a lot of competing needs and priorities across a business, and everybody is often fighting for something within their own function or department and kind of their slice of the world and what they know of the world. And so it can be hard to make everyone happy. My point is choose your battles. And there are times when certainly you want to stand up for yourself when it's a ethical issue or, something that's, really serious. But there's a lot of other times where you're going to need to choose who you want to stand up to. And I often, and it's something that has made me successful over the years, I choose my battles. There are times when I just take the higher road and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to get into it with that person because it's not going to help me long term. And I can just swallow my pride and move past the situation where I know I'm right, but that person has more power than me and it's not worth, I'm going to take their shit. It's just not worth it. I'm going to take their shit. I'm going to have a smile and I'm going to keep moving. And I've done it all the time. And again, I've not done it in an ethical situation, right? I'm not going to like take someone's shit if it's, again, like a legal issue or something else that is, sexual harassment or something like that. But you know what I mean? Like there just are times where like you got to choose your battles and you got to decide who you want to fight and if you want to fight something. And that's why like I have won over even being kind to people who were not always kind to me and who were very difficult. And I, as a result, got a reputation of being able to work with anybody and build strong relationships, even in people who were perceived as difficult within an organization. So I will say I'm not disagreeing with you, Mike. I'm more saying you don't have to put up with, you were saying don't put up with people's shit. You're going to have to put up with some people's shit.
Put up with a little bit of shit is what you're saying.
You're going to put up with a little bit of shit. Like, yes, exactly. We'll quote that also. Put up with a little bit of shit, not too much shit, just a little bit of shit. And we'll talk about this more in the like how to get promoted, but you got to know what shit to put up with and what shit to not put up with. Maybe said a different way. Okay. We're done talking about shit now. Let's move on to the next one.
Number 3 is make good choices. And your whole life is going to be made up of choices. You choose the path, you choose your response, and you choose your attitude. And attitude is going to play such a huge part in your career progression and just your ability to succeed in corporate life. You can be amazing at your job, but if you have a shitty personality and you are not enjoyable to be around, people are not going to hire you into new jobs or higher level jobs. And so choices, you need to make good choices in your life. But one of those choices is attitude, and that's a really critical one.
Yeah, I think it's so important. The number of kind of toxic people with bad attitudes that I have had to manage out over the years, it's a real thing, right? Like you said, they might have been good at their jobs in a one respect, but it's hard to holistically be good at your job if you don't have a positive attitude. And I'm not saying every day, like everybody has their bad days. Everybody has, tough times they've got to get through. But more often than not, you do get to choose your attitude and choose your response and, make good choices.
And I will say, and Maggie, I think you would agree with this, as someone who's hired many people in the past, positive attitude plays a huge part in someone's candidacy for a job. Because positive attitude means they are willing to learn, they are willing to deal with adversity, and you are going to enjoy having them on your team. And so it can overcome deficiencies in some of your experience or skills. It's critical.
Yeah. I totally agree. And a positive attitude that's authentic, right? I know it's this is everything we are talking about. It is
triple caveated.
Well, I was going to say it's an art. It's not a science, right? And we'll talk about that more later because I want to make a point around. I'll tell a story later that I think will kind of tie together the kind of art versus science piece when we get to another point. Big teaser that's going to make you stick around for the end of this episode. I know it is. Okay, number 4, work with intention. So I think being intentional, we talk about it or tied to money and how you spend money all the time. But when you think about work, take a step back and decide who you want to be, right? And who you are, and figure out your purpose. Be mindful about how you want to be, which is all the things we're talking about here, right? When I take a step back and think about how I want to be, it's all the things we're talking about here. And actually, I said I was going to tell this story later on, but I'll tell this story now because I'm realizing it's relevant.
Nobody's going to stick around to the end. That's what people are listening.
Well, there's other really good stuff at the end, including one of my favorite work-related books of all time, most inspiring books. Okay. So I once went through a leadership course at my current company, and it was amazing. It was one of the best courses I had ever been through, and it was called Leading with Purpose. And I think that's what it's called. I was much younger than I am now. I want to say it was almost 10 years ago. I've been at our company for 15 years. It was almost 10 years ago. It was a long time ago. So I was 30, right around then. Still a young whippersnapper, so much to learn in the world. And there was the two guys that were teaching this course. They were these two like British coaches and like career consultants, and they were fantastic. But there was a point where I started feeling, and this is kind of the way I am, I started feeling like we were being taught to be a certain way. And I was like asking them a legitimate question. And I was like, is any part of this inauthentic? You're telling me how I should be to be a successful leader. And their response, I have a terrible memory, Mike, but their response to that question is something I've always remembered. Exactly what he said and like where we were. I could just picture the moment because it meant so much to me, and it kind of like gave me an aha in my head. So he made the statement that it's funny. I joke that I could remember it exactly. I'm going to butcher exactly what he said, but he said something like, "You're practicing who you wish to become." So he was like, if you don't want to be this way, then don't do it. But we're all trying to be a certain way, and we have intention, which is, the point we're talking about here of work with intention. And I initially sort of construed what we were talking about in the session as being inauthentic. And are you telling me how I need to be as a person? And he was like, no, I'm telling you, figure out who you want to be and then practice being that, because it doesn't always come naturally, right? You have days where you're stressed out and you might, not act the way we're talking about because of other stressors in your life. But his point was figure out how you want to be and then practice who you want to become, which I don't know if that makes sense to you and is kind of like the aha moment that I had when he said it, because you're looking at me a little bit confused.
I'm not sure I'm following it. I think that I'm missing some context of this leadership course.
Okay, well, let me give you an example. So I could take the list we're giving people today. Okay. You might say, well, but I don't want to be nice. I don't want to worry about myself. That's not who I am. Right. And so me telling you to do these things and that this is what will make you successful, somebody might respond to it and say, well, that's not authentic. That's not who I am. right? I'm going to be this way because that's how I am, right? I don't put up with people's shit. I always speak up if I don't agree with some situation, whatever. His point was, you are practicing who you wish to become. Mm-hmm. And so it's not inauthentic. It's not inauthentic for you to take something and say, again, using this example of, I'm not willing to put up with crap from anyone else. I will always stand up when I believe something wrong is happening around me that I know better. And I don't mean like ethically wrong. I mean that I'm right and that person's wrong. Like, you would see a million things at your company that you disagree with, that somebody 5 levels up who has more information than you do about a situation is making a decision that you might think is wrong or something. And maybe that's not the best example. I think it's more, when you're leading and managing people and you have to practice who you want to become, because it's not always going to come naturally, right? Like, how you give feedback. I mean, I've given feedback and said things to people over the years that it didn't land as gently or as kindly as it could or should have, right? And I've got to practice that, right? And I'm an incredibly direct person, and sometimes I've got to adjust that around the style of other people. And that's not inauthentic. That's just, I do want to deliver things in a way that are meaningful and land to other people. So I'm going to bring this point home. The point is just be intentional, think about how you want to be as a person and what you want your personal brand to be. And there's nothing inauthentic about that, because all you're doing is thoughtfully thinking about who you want to be and how you want to be, and practicing being more like that and not being more like some other tendencies that all of us might naturally have that we need to kind of, bad habits that we need to kind of get rid of and move past.
All right. That makes sense, Maggie. And I like that. So moving on to number 5, speak the truth. And this is important. And I'll share a little bit of detail around this, but say what you think, give feedback, and care enough about your job to be honest. There are so many situations where companies develop groupthink, or people higher up come up with an idea and there's pressure to go along with it because you want to be part of the masses or you want to be supportive of your leader. Now, this isn't to say, like, raise your hand when your CEO comes out with some new product and say, this is a terrible idea. But if you know that something isn't working right or won't turn out the way people are expecting, give critical, honest feedback about it, because you will become part of the solution instead of going down with the ship. And I have seen this so many times where something isn't working and people continue to be cheerleaders for it, and the program or the product or the platform continues to spiral down, and those people find themselves out of a job or have some stigma about being associated with this product. But if you are speaking up and offering solutions, you can then find incredible career opportunities involved in fixing a product or relaunching something.
Yeah, I also, Mike, on this one, I love the term radical candor. Candor. It's a word that's hard to say for some reason.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before.
Yeah, we have candor.
Candor is a sounds like it's a planet in Star Wars.
Yeah, radical candor.
Yep.
Which is, being like, you said it before, but caring enough to be honest. And I think about it when managing people also, which again, we'll talk about more in kind of a follow-on episode on how to get promoted. But when you're managing people, it's hard to give negative and critical feedback to people. But I've heard this term somewhere over the years, and it really stuck with me, of just the concept of thinking, like, caring enough about that person to be honest with them, right? Like, how terrible would it be if you knew everybody had a problem with you and that they thought you were not good in some particular area or had a bad attitude or whatever, and nobody ever told you? Like, I often think that about other people, and it drives me to make sure that I'm honest with other people, particularly people that work for me, and that I have an accountability to give them feedback for. And I've actually somehow over the years, there's probably some people that don't like me as a result of this, because I know they don't agree with me, but I have over the years somehow ended up during different reorgs with people on my team where, when they were put on my team, because I didn't choose, they were handed to me, I was told all the issues with them. And then I had to deal, and I'm like, well, how come no one dealt with this before? Like, like no one wants it. A lot of people don't want to deal with this. It's difficult and it's stressful on a personal and professional level. And I've had to deliver feedback. And then what happens is it's the first time they've ever heard it because everyone else has avoided giving it to them. So they look at me like I'm, have a third eye and I'm wrong, and they don't agree with it. And I say that because everyone who is managing people and who has the opportunity to observe and or receive feedback from other stakeholders and peers, you have an accountability to speak up and share that feedback in a kind and respectable way with particularly the people that work for you. You don't necessarily have the accountability to go giving feedback to like your peers. It's not a strategy I would recommend unless they're asking. But anyways, you get the idea. I think that's a great one. And on your point, Mike, about being a part of the solution, which I think is just in general, probably could be its own piece of advice. Our next one is number 6, be a linchpin. And so this is the one where I was going to reference my favorite book. One of my favorite books that I read in my early 20s is Linchpin by Seth Godin. So most people have probably heard of Seth Godin. He's got a really popular blog and media platform. He's written a ton of books. I read Linchpin. It's an amazing book. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. He's also got this 1-page Linchpin manifesto. But it's all around, linchpin is like what holds a door together and makes it work, right? You need it or the door does not function. And his point is, be that part of the door that is not easily replaced. If you lose it, the whole thing quits functioning, right? And so he is all about, he's got this amazing manifesto that's, again, this 1-page document that we'll put a link to in the show notes. So if you're not going to read the book, just read the manifesto. And it's amazing. It has all of these like pithy short phrases of like, I am a linchpin. I am not easily replaced. I do the work, not the job. Every interaction is an opportunity to make a connection. Artists don't care about credit. We care about change. Go make something happen. The work matters. It's got all these really, I think, kind of beautiful phrases in it, if I can call it beautiful. And it's just about like hard work. Like you have to, if you want to be successful, you have got to do meaningful work and you've got to have strong work ethic. Like you can't phone it in. You've got to do, this is step 1, right? When we talk about step 2 of how you want to get promoted, you got to be really good at the job you have today. And then we'll talk about all the EQ skills and all the things the influence and everything else you need to do to be able to navigate an organization and get promoted and get other jobs. But you can't get to any of that if you just don't do the work, right? And so you've got to focus on doing amazing work and not being easily replaceable.
One of the things I learned at AT&T when I worked there, and I was there for a long time, is that, many times people will try hard to take credit for the work. They will associate themselves with important projects and play more of a political game, kind of step in when things are finished. They will want to be the communicator of ideas, even though they weren't involved in it. And that really frustrates people who are kind of boots on the ground, creating and executing. And what's can be a little demoralizing is that many times those people who don't really do the work, but take credit for the work, will be recognized and they will be promoted for it. And that can seem frustrating and it will seem like that is the path. But what I can assure you of is that even though sometimes those people get rewarded for it, the people who really do the work always get rewarded for it, because the decision makers, the higher ups who know how this stuff is being done, understand who is critical to their business and will reward and recognize those people. You might not see it because it's in a different part of the business or it's a little bit more subtle, but if you do the work, you will always be recognized for it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One thing I always try to do as a manager of people is like shout out and, brag or I say communicate, but some people would call it bragging, which we'll talk about again in a future episode. But communication is critical. And I'm constantly trying to call out other people on my team and elsewhere to give them the credit for great work done. And when we're announcing things. And I think that's so important. But Mike's right. Like there will be times when somebody else takes credit and kind of implies they did more or something that you actually were, a huge contributor to and really didn't get the credit for. And again, these are the situations where like you got to choose your response. You got to decide, you got to choose your battles. You got to decide how you're going to respond to that. But really know most of the time, the people that really matter know who did the work, right? Like your boss. I mean, this happens to me all the time, right? It happened to me somewhat recently, actually. And I know that the people who matter know who did the work, right? I'm not going to sit there and like make a stink and be like, well, this note implies that you were involved in this and you weren't, and you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm taking the higher path. It doesn't matter. I'm not worried. I know who did the work and I know who should get the credit, whether they always get it or not. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think this again also goes back to like, worry about yourself, like know that you did it. And again, if this were to keep happening and if this were to keep happening to you where someone else is taking credit for work you're doing, you're likely in like a toxic work situation, which is a whole nother issue. So we're talking about how to be successful in a somewhat high functioning or even medium functioning, because a lot of corporate America is medium functioning versus high functioning, I'd say, if that's a term, medium functioning.
I'd agree with that.
But there are like completely toxic, not normal, not functioning work environments. And I can't, that's a whole different discussion and a podcast episode.
Yeah. All right. Number 7, better is possible. So we are all a work in progress. We are all imperfect, but it is important that you drive positive change in the face of some negative conditions, even if those negative conditions or are attributes about yourself. And regardless of where you are in the journey, either on yourself or with your organization, appreciate that you have the opportunity to improve and get better, because you can look back and feel good about your success. You can look forward and think about all the opportunity you will have to become a better person and help drive a better organization.
Yeah, better as possible is one of my favorite phrases. And speaking of quotes, like crediting quotes, Mike, I know a number of organizations who have used this quote, which is where I found it. And you'll see the flag that I have on my wall, better as possible. Mm-hmm. I know our listeners cannot see, sorry. Someday maybe we'll do videos. Mike, I think your better as possible point ties back to what we've said a number of times also around being a part of the solution, right? Like always focusing on solutions, and that there can always be better ways to do things will definitely give you more career success over your life. Number 8 is less is more. And this is one that is very close to my heart, like I said, but it can be taken from a number of angles. So I think when you actually look at what can drive the most success at work, there's a value to some professional simplicity and minimalism and focus, right? Of you can't do everything. You will never be successful at everything. You've got to find some level of kind of focus and simplicity in your work life. And what I mean is like the projects you take on and the tasks that you're able to accomplish. If you try to be everything to everyone, you won't succeed. If you try to do do fewer things really well, you'll be more successful in your career. And that's an area where I've actually struggled over the years, believe it or not. Mike probably believes it.
I believe it.
I know. I'm all over the place. I got a million kind of, what's the irons in the fire? Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Got a million irons in the fire. And in some ways it's made me successful because I am able to handle a lot of different competing things and tasks. But I look at some other people over the years and I think like, wow, they were really able to get, that program from here to here and build that thing. And I, it's times when it's hard to do that when you've got, a million different things in the fire. And I actually, in the past year, I moved to a new role and out of where I had been for 14 years at this company. And I moved to a role where I had a lot more focus and there were not as many things that I was trying to do at once. And I was finding like I was able to do those things better. Right. And so for once I went and like worked on a special project and I was able to do a really good job with that project because I wasn't trying to do 50 different things. So anyways, the point is there's value in less and trying to find that in your work. And this is where I think there's a financial angle that actually comes in really interestingly here because, when we talk about simplicity and minimalism and wanting less and doing more, if you can crack that financially also, like in your personal life, if you can get to the point where you're not constantly wanting more and you're able to be happy with a level of simplicity, then you're going to continually make more money likely over the course of your career. And this is where, if you can curb lifestyle inflation, it can make you incredibly successful financially. Like, right, you're constantly making more money, and then you're able to save more and more money, and you're not increasing the cost of your lifestyle and everything else. And then that financial success that you've then been able to have because you've been able to kind of, again, curb your lifestyle, yet you're still making more money. That creates what we call like well, not we, but what people call like financial freedom or financial independence, whatever you want to call it. That freedom and that financial success, which again, isn't just coming from making more money, it's coming from spending less money, which is my point here about less is more, and tying it back to money, will instill a confidence in you and how you do your job. And we should do a whole nother episode on this, Mike, because there's such an interesting connection between your confidence in your ability to do a good job at work and how you are with your money and how you are with your personal finances. But that confidence and what that can bring you professionally is unmatchable by anything else, I would argue. The feeling and the benefits of financial freedom back to your job. I know this might be a tough point to land. So I'll quit trying to land it in a second. But it's incredibly important. And so I think there's a whole financial angle. My point is to the less is more piece that you could tie back around to if you practice it, even just outside of your professional life and financially how you're handling things. And you can understand that you don't need a lot of things to be happy, then you can do really well financially, which will just have compound interest effects on how you do in your career.
All right, number 9, and we have 11. So for those of you wondering, we're getting to the end of this. Number 9, give back. And you should give back at work and outside work, but specifically at work. Leave things better than when you came. And this isn't just about doing business projects. This is about all those other things that happen in a company environment. So help other people who are at work with personal issues or work-related issues or career issues. Be a mentor. Be an ally for underrepresented groups in your company. Be active in work activities that create good for people, whether it's good for the employees or good for people outside the company. These are all things that will not only make you feel good, but will help create a personal brand for yourself and better relationships.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I've always been a big believer in being a part of the community you work and live in. And I think giving back at work is a huge piece. I think the other point, Mike, what you said is outside of work also. So if you work, I like to remind people, like when I'm talking to people, particularly within corporate America, if you have a job in corporate America, you are wealthy. So you may not feel like it, especially in a more entry-level job, but you are compared to the rest of the world. My point is you are very wealthy and you have a lot. So, manage it well, give back where you can. And there's a lot of kind of buzz terms around like effective altruism and conscious capitalism. And, but just like you said, leaving things better than kind of where you came from and recognizing how much you have personally and professionally and using that to give back personally and professionally, I think is incredibly important. And I agree with you, Mike, like makes you feel good, but more importantly, it does great things for everyone around you. Okay, number 10, this is a quick one. Take care of yourself. So this is the phrase of put the oxygen mask on yourself before other people. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't do anything else well. So this is whatever taking care of yourself and being well means for you personally. For me, it's eating well, getting enough sleep, exercising, meditating, taking time off, actually using my vacation. And I think, the sort of whole self wellness piece comes in here and is incredibly important.
And number 11, our final one on the list, be you, whoever that is.
You do you.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
Do you, right?
And Maggie, you mentioned the word authentic when you were talking about your leadership course. And this is part of it. Like lean into what makes you, but also practice who you wish to become. It is easy for people to read if you are being inauthentic, and it is hard to recover from that because it erodes trust. Lean into those things that make you uniquely you and that you find the most success at, because that will help you along your career path, but will also create the most fulfilling and happy life for you as well.
Yeah. And this is where I was going to share the story about someone telling me practice who you wish to become, that I was joking. I was going to save for the end that I've already told. But it is just practice who you wish to become, right? We are all works in progress. We all have things we love about ourselves, and we all have moments where we wish we had done something better. Or we wish we had handled something differently, and be authentic and be intentional and constantly learn and improve. We're not all going to be perfect all the time. Okay, I like to take these we just shared a list of 11 things and then somehow do top 3 takeaways from it.
All right.
But I think this is important because the first one of these top 3 takeaways is what we hit on when we were talking about being a linchpin, but it is something that I am very passionate about for a number of reasons. Number 1, it takes hard work to be successful. There is no get rich quick scheme. I mean, lots of people try to act like there are. There is no magical fast track to success. The people 99% of the time, I know there's some flukes out there. 99% of the people who are successful, it takes hard work, and you got to put the work in.
Number 2, it takes EQ as much as IQ, and this is emotional intelligence. And you have to lean into the softer skills more often than the hard skills.
Yeah, that's something we'll talk about on a follow-up to this discussion also. Okay, number 3, I'd be remiss to not say number 3, by the way, Mike, because we are a financial podcast and all. As you have success in your career, the money will come, and you need to be prepared to handle it responsibly, right? So think ahead and even when you don't yet make, what you might consider more money or better money, think about what you will do once that money does come and plan for it and be intentional. A lot of times as more money starts to come to people, they're just like, oh, wow, more money. I'm going to spend it on, I'm going to buy a nicer car. I'm going to upgrade my house, blah, blah, blah. And they don't even get a chance to really think about what they want to do as they become more successful professionally and as the money starts to increase as a result. So be thoughtful. Listen to our podcast. We've got, hundreds of episodes that will help inspire you on what to do with all that money you're making as you're successful in your career.
So as mentioned a few times, we will have a follow-up to this episode with some more tactical advice about how to get promoted and, find quote unquote success in a corporate career. But I hope this was helpful for everybody.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.
If you have any thoughts or questions, we would love to hear from you. You can always leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can hit us up on Instagram.
Thanks, Maggie. This was fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. It's nice to reflect on what we've learned and absorbed over the years and what has made us both successful in different ways.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Bye.